I snapped back to reality when I heard Kevin's shout. Hey! James! Is that true? Being shaken, I managed to answer somehow. It is true, but it's not a big deal. As I was answering, feeling dizzy, a lovely voice echoed. It is a big deal. I turned around to see a beautiful woman in a pantsuit standing there with a slightly puffed cheek. Kevin's eyes widened at the sudden appearance of the beautiful woman. My name is James Parker, 48 years old. Somehow, I feel a bit nervous. Currently, I'm holding a postcard, hesitating a bit before entering the hotel. The postcard reads, Notice of the 45th reunion of ABC High School, 30th graduation anniversary. It's an invitation to the high school reunion. My high school days were tumultuous. ABC High School was one of the top-ranked schools in the state. Being good at studying, I always maintained top grades even at ABC High School. I planned to go to college and then start my own business to become a president. Since my father had started a business and served as its president, I was contemplating whether to take over his company or start a new venture. I used to talk about such dreams with my friends. My life plan fell apart in the winter of my sophomore year. My father failed in his business, leading to bankruptcy. My family ended up with a huge debt. With the debt, I couldn't rely on my parents for college tuition and living expenses. I was offered a scholarship, but it was just another form of debt. I refused to take on debt like my father had, not wanting both of us to be burdened with huge debts. Giving up on going to college, I stopped studying. After all, I would just get a job after graduating from high school. I didn't engage in clear delinquency, but I started skipping school or leaving early. As my behavior worsened, so did my grades. I didn't care. If I wasn't going to college, it didn't matter if my grades were bad. At that time, I was in a state of self-destruction. Those were the days. I thought, chuckling at the memory of my younger self. I'd become old enough to think of it as a youthful indiscretion. As I was lost in thought, a voice came from behind. Are you here for the ABC High School reunion? When I turned around, after a moment of silence, the person raised their voice. James. Is that you? Recognizing the voice and expression, I remembered too. Are you Kevin? He nodded vigorously, and we both smiled. So nostalgic. How have you been? He slapped my back, and I replied with a wry smile. I've been well. You seem well too, Kevin. Hearing this, Kevin grinned. Wow. What's with that suit? It's pretty nice. Weren't you the one who went straight into a job after high school? Yeah, the factory. That's a pretty nice suit for a factory guy. I responded with a wry smile. You remember people's paths pretty well. Kevin raised his eyebrows in response to my question. I remember because it was shocking. You, the smart one, weren't in the college prep class in our senior year, and everyone made a big fuss. When we realized you'd been missing a lot from the end of our sophomore year, it all made sense. There were quite a few rumors. As he dug into my youthful indiscretions, I scratched my head. Well, a lot happened. I quit the factory job, though. As I started to give an update, Kevin interrupted. What? You quit the factory too? Can't stick to anything, huh? I've been at the same company since graduating college. You know, staying put has its perks. I'm a manager now, check it out, here's my card. Looking at the business card, I saw it was from a pretty big company. A manager at a major company, huh? I said, and Kevin puffed out his chest. It was tough at first, but perseverance pays off. He said with a proud snort, and I smiled wryly. Just then, a voice came from behind. Oh, this is nostalgic. Kevin, is that you? I turned around, and there stood Mr. Anderson. My high school teacher was standing there. Wow. Mr. Anderson. It's been a while. Why are you in a lab coat? I thought you retired. Mr. Anderson, who used to teach biology, always wore a lab coat. He laughed. Well, a lab coat is my signature look, you know? A suit doesn't suit me. There was no malice in Mr. Anderson's hearty laugh. Seeing him in his lab coat brought back more high school memories. Mr. Anderson was the biology teacher for the entire grade and my homeroom teacher in senior year. My high school had college prep classes for humanities and sciences, and a mixed class for those not planning to go to college. In a school where most students aim for college, my intention to work right after high school was unusual, so my class had few students. Even when he was teaching biology, it was clear that Mr. Anderson was quite unkempt. His lab coat was always rumpled, and his hair was messy. He looked much older than 38 years old at the time. To me back then, he seemed very lax. His catchphrase was, "Do as you like." If I asked to leave early from a boring afternoon class, he'd say, "What are you leaving early for? Studying? Not social studies, but math? Okay. Do as you like. I'll mark you absent." If someone aiming to be a public employee suddenly changed their career path, he'd say, "What? Changing to a vocational school? Okay. I'll cancel your next mock exam, do as you like." But in reality, it wasn't light-hearted for Mr. Anderson. He respected the paths students chose and supported them, pushing them forward. I realized this years later. As we reminisced about 30 years ago, we entered the venue, chatting while picking at the food. In the middle of the venue, various dishes were laid out in a buffet style, with round tables placed around the sides. Everyone was chatting at their respective tables. Still wearing his familiar rumpled lab coat, Mr. Anderson listened to Kevin's updates. "A manager, huh? You've worked hard." Kevin answered with a smile. "Thanks to you teachers, I got into my desired college. The career path I've taken wouldn't have been possible with just a high school diploma." "James, if things had gone smoothly, you could have been on the same path as me. No, with your brains, you might have gone even further." Feeling a bit annoyed at his pity, I slightly bristled. Whether knowing my feelings or not, no, Mr. Anderson definitely knew. He signaled Kevin to sit down. "I've got an interesting story for you, so have a seat." Kevin, trusting Mr. Anderson, sat down without any doubt. "An interesting story? What is it?" Kevin asked with a smile, setting his plate on the table and leaning in. "It's about this guy," Mr. Anderson said, pointing at me with a grin. Wondering what story would come out, I nervously took a seat next to Mr. Anderson. After graduating high school, I got a job at a factory. Taking advantage of Mr. Anderson's do-as-you-like attitude, I found a factory job on my own and went for the interview. Since my high school was a top-ranked school, it had very few job recommendation slots. And those were allocated to students more outstanding than me. Having given up on studying from the winter of my sophomore year, my grades in my senior year were terrible. And I wasn't included in the slots that the school confidently recommended. I wasn't keen on job hunting through my high school, and when I reported to Mr. Anderson afterward, he scratched his head and said, It's amazing you got an offer. I'll report it to the school, so do your best, and let me go." I was taken aback. Since not going through the school could lead to issues with wages and working hours, even at a top-ranked school, those wanting to work were advised to go through the school. I expected to get in trouble for ignoring this advice, but there was no punishment at all. I later found out that Mr. Anderson had bowed to the grade leader and confirmed the conditions at the factory for me. Unaware of everything, I felt a bit proud of having found a job on my own, which was childish of me. I was being protected by adults without realizing it. Starting work at the factory left me exhausted every day. I used to attend classes half-heartedly, leave early whenever I felt like it, and skip school on days I didn't feel like going, making up random excuses. Now, suddenly, I started a full-time job where I'm on my feet all day. Of course, it was exhausting. During such times, I would remember Mr. Anderson. If you chose this path, do as you like. But if you chose it, see it through. Even if you change paths midway, see that new path through. These seemingly contradictory words somehow stuck with me. Perhaps because of this, I ran into Mr. Anderson on my way home one evening. "Oh, James. Long time no see. You're working hard, huh?" Seeing me in my work clothes, Mr. Anderson laughed. "Mr. Anderson, what are you doing out this late?" I asked in a casual tone, and he scratched his head and said with a wry smile, "Well, you could call it an evening home visit." Ahead was a police box. ABC High School was a top-ranked school. Students who decided against attending a public university often had various reasons. Those who found a path they loved were fine, but those like me, whose paths were closed for unwilling reasons, could become reckless. I never got into trouble with the law, but some of my classmates did. "You've got it tough too, Mr. Anderson," I said, slightly understanding, and Mr. Anderson laughed heartily. "The day James shows me concern has come, huh?" His words treated me like a child, but his tone was pleased. My chest tightened a bit. "You live alone, right? Do you have time now?" Having left home when I started working, I was living alone in an apartment. I had planned to just buy some prepared food at the supermarket and have a simple dinner afterward. "Why don't you come to my place? Tell me how you've been," Mr. Anderson said, pulling me along. When we arrived at his house, his wife served me dinner. It was stew. She apologized for it being simple, saying she was glad she had made extra. But to me, it was a warm meal after a long time, and the stew, made without store-bought roux, was exquisite. After eating my fill, the door opened. "Oh, you're back. This is my daughter, Linda." A girl in a school uniform bowed to me. She had a small face with well-shaped eyes, nose, and mouth. An incredibly cute girl. "Wow, your daughter? She doesn't look like you at all, Mr. Anderson," I said, and Linda blushed and quickly went to her room. I felt a bit embarrassed. "Oh, sorry. I said something weird." When I apologized, Mr. Anderson laughed. "No, I hear that a lot. She takes after her mother. I'm glad she does. Sometimes people even ask if she's really my child." When Mr. Anderson laughed heartily, Linda changed into her casual clothes and sat at the table. "I'm definitely your daughter," Linda said, a bit sulky. Watching her, I quickly realized something. Linda adored her father, Mr. Anderson. She was upset because someone suggested she wasn't his child. It was endearing to see such a reaction from a teenager who should be at an age where they typically find their parents annoying. I decided to share some stories about Mr. Anderson. Linda laughed heartily at my stories. Seeing this, Mr. Anderson muttered, "Linda, why don't you have James tutor you?" Both Linda and I were surprised by this suggestion. Touching his chin, Mr. Anderson continued, "This is the first time I've seen Linda enjoy talking to one of my former students. He may have given up on studying, but he's pretty smart." Linda looked down, embarrassed. Currently in her second year of middle school, Linda was struggling with her studies. She attended cram school after club activities. But her grades weren't improving. Mr. Anderson considered hiring a tutor, but Linda was shy, and he himself wasn't knowledgeable outside of biology, so he was at a loss. "Is your factory job okay with side gigs? I'll pay you. What do you think?" Glancing at Linda, I saw a worried expression. Her desire to improve her grades was clear. "If it's okay with you, but I'll need some time to review middle school studies." At this, Mr. Anderson laughed heartily. "James, you're earnest at heart." His praise made me a bit embarrassed. After that, I started visiting the Anderson household twice a week. I insisted on being paid in meals instead of money. Mrs. Anderson readily agreed, but Mr. Anderson still gave me a separate salary. Linda struggled to understand things at first. Even simple formulas couldn't be memorized unless she fully grasped the reasoning behind them. But once she understood, she showed promise. I broke down and explained the concepts thoroughly. Linda's reactions were clear when she truly understood something. Her eyes sparkled. She was originally a cute girl, but with that expression, she was incredibly charming. I found myself almost falling for this middle school student. Sensing this, Mr. Anderson would often enter the room without knocking, preventing any sweet atmosphere. I also had many conversations with Mr. Anderson. Next week is going to be busy. I wish I could teach Linda from home. When I muttered this, Mr. Anderson teased, "Why not use video calls? Do you know how much that would cost?" I replied, and Mr. Anderson nonchalantly said, "Then why don't you create such a system?" "That's impossible." To my words, he responded seriously. "Why? Big companies are already using video conferencing." I pouted. "That's for big companies." Mr. Anderson didn't back down. If such a system exists, it will eventually become widespread. If digital networks become common, the world will change drastically. We might be able to make video calls with anyone, anywhere in the world. I furrowed my brows. For a biology teacher, you sure know a lot. Mr. Anderson grinned. Always keep your antenna up. You never know what might become a useful hint. His words struck a chord with me. I once dreamed of starting my own business. Could I really do it? Me, who just graduated high school and found a random factory job, living day by day. It was as if Mr. Anderson read my mind. You're still young, you can become anything. Do what you want when you feel like doing it. If you need anything, I'll support you with all my might. Those words deeply resonated with me. True to his word, whenever I lost my way, he extended a helping hand and supported me in many ways. And now, he's the president of a group of 10 companies. Mr. Anderson said with a smile, addressing Kevin across the round table at the reunion. As Mr. Anderson recounted stories from my high school days, our reunion, and tutoring Linda, a flood of memories washed over me. I was snapped back to reality by Kevin's shout. What? President? James? He grabbed my shoulders and shook me. Hey! James! Is that true? Being shaken, I managed to answer somehow. It is true, but it's not a big deal. As I was answering, feeling dizzy, a lovely voice echoed. It is a big deal. I turned around to see Linda in a pantsuit standing there with a slightly puffed cheek. Linda? What's wrong? Did something happen? Mr. Anderson asked, surprised. Linda sighed. Dad, you forgot your phone. Unbelievable. It's a reunion, don't you need to exchange contact information with people? Mr. Anderson patted his lab coat pockets. Oh, did I forget it? Didn't even notice. True to his usual self, he rarely used his phone. As I chuckled, Linda turned to me. And James, this. She pointed at my wallet, and I panicked. What? No way. Oh, it's really not here. My wallet was missing from my small bag. Of course, Linda had it. Mr. Anderson burst into laughter. Forgot your wallet? I can get by without my phone, but... I protested. No. The phone is more important. I brought the reunion fee in an envelope, and I mostly use mobile payments. In our argument, Linda sighed and said, both of you are hopeless, cutting us off, making both Mr. Anderson and me shrink back. Kevin's voice cut in. Wait, what? Mr. Anderson's daughter. And? I proudly put an arm around Linda's shoulders. This is my wife, Linda. Linda bowed politely. Nice to meet you. Thank you for taking care of my father and my husband. I hope they haven't caused you any trouble. Dad hasn't been saying anything weird, has he? Mr. Anderson, resting his elbow on the table, looked a bit sulky. Why am I the only one? Linda smiled at him. James doesn't say weird things, he's kind. Mr. Anderson chuckled. After about 2 hours, the reunion came to an end. It was a meaningful time, chatting with Kevin and many other former classmates. As we were leaving, I had a brief conversation with Kevin. Kevin, you pitted me for working at a factory with just a high school diploma, but I enjoyed it. Sure. Working at a big company with a high salary is great, but everyone's definition of happiness is different. Now, even as a president, I sometimes wish for more free time. So, well, I took a deep breath. Even if I fail and end up in debt, I'll still enjoy it, so don't pity me. I said nonchalantly, and Kevin chuckled. That's exactly what I'd expect from someone with Mr. Anderson as a father-in-law. You've really grown into someone unfazed by anything. That was the highest compliment for me. Let's grab a drink sometime. I'd love to hear more about your business, he said, and I nodded with a smile. Since we were already here, I rejoined Linda and Mr. Anderson, who were waiting nearby. After chatting with various students and having a few drinks, Mr. Anderson was completely drunk. Muttering in his sleep, he complained about me not calling him father-in-law. I chuckled. You're too great for me to call you that. Linda giggled. even though he's just a drunk old man. As she drove, I admired her profile. Even at 43, she was still beautiful. Noticing my gaze, Linda glanced at me. Somehow, this reminds me of that day. Back then, you were the one driving. Her words made me recall that day too. That day was the day Linda got accepted into college. I continued tutoring Linda even after she got into high school, seriously restudying from my sophomore year to teach her, and guided her until she was accepted into college. She had asked me to take her on a celebratory drive if she got into her first choice, a top university. Her first choice was a prestigious university, so I lightly agreed to her request, but she ended up passing, which made me a bit nervous. Why was I nervous? By that time, I had fallen for Linda, and if it weren't for the scenario where Mr. Anderson might interrupt, I might have made a move. Being alone in a car with her was dangerous. But Linda got accepted. So, to fulfill my promise, I took her for a drive with her in the passenger seat. Linda kept looking at me while I drove, making my heart race. Suddenly, she spoke. "James, do you know why I chose to major in economics?" I answered, feeling nervous. "You want to start a business someday, right? You said you were inspired by our talks, so you chose the business department." She smiled. "I don't want to start a business myself." Her answer puzzled me. "I want to support you." I thought about what studies would help me support you as a president, so I chose economics. The light turned red, and the car stopped. My heart was pounding, feeling like it should stay stopped forever. "I love you, James." Her confession made my heart race even faster. "I decided to tell you once I got into college. Even if you don't feel the same, I'll work hard and join your company. Please let me work with you." I couldn't help but start the car as the light turned green, and pulled into a nearby supermarket parking lot. Nervous, I failed to park several times, but finally managed to do so, and turned off the engine, sweating profusely. Linda, seeing my silence, looked down, not saying a word. The silence was heavy. I didn't know how to start. But my feelings were the same. "I love you too." Hearing my words, Linda's eyes widened. She looked incredulous. "Well, it's usually the other way around, someone as cute and honest as you, why me?" I caused Mr. Anderson so much trouble in school. Took a random job at a factory, and now I'm trying to start a business, and who knows if it would succeed. Linda shook her head firmly. "My father always talked about you. He said it was such a waste that you had dreams but had them crushed by your family's circumstances. That you had the strength to climb back up but had given up, yet your eyes still showed him were struggling. He wanted you to be the happiest. He has many students, and he often talks about them, but I quickly realized something. The person he wanted to be the happiest was you, James." Tears naturally fell from my eyes. "The moment I met you, I also wanted you to be the happiest. And during the time you tutored me, I fell in love with you as a man. When I couldn't understand something and my teacher would just tell me to memorize the formula, you broke it down and explained it to me. No matter how long it took me to understand, you never looked at me with disappointment. I fell more and more in love with you for patiently teaching me until I understood." Linda's eyes were brimming with tears. "I don't just want you to be happy. I want to be the one to make you happy. It might be presumptuous of me, but..." She clenched her fists on her lap. I covered her hands with mine. "Thank you for seeing me for who I am." Linda giggled. "Are you saying that to me, or to my father?" I looked straight at her. "Of course, to you, Linda." When I said that, she leaned in for a kiss, and I panicked. "Wait. No, no. That's why I parked at a supermarket, because it's bright and we won't get carried away. We need Mr. Anderson's permission first." I rambled on, and Linda pouted. "It's so mean to call it getting carried away. I've always wanted to." I cut her off before she could say something too sweet. "Anyway, I love you, but let's take it slow." She turned forward in her seat, still pouting. "Fine. I understand." Her sulky tone made me desperate. "I just want to cherish you. Is that okay?" When I glanced at her, her pout softened a bit. "Then, please cherish me." I felt relieved and smiled at her. Until we get married, no funny business. It was a relief that came too soon. That's a bit, can you cut me some slack on that? I hurriedly bowed my head. In that moment, our relationship was cemented. No matter how old I get, Linda always has the upper hand. I smiled at her profile as she drove, the opposite of that day. Linda kept her eyes on the road but smiled. Mr. Parker? Your online meeting starts in 10 minutes, right? Her words made me panic. I had asked to move the meeting to tomorrow because of the reunion, but they insisted on today, so it was scheduled for tonight. As I opened my laptop, I groaned. Still, the world really turned out just like Mr. Anderson said. I glanced at Mr. Anderson, who was snoring in the back seat, and spoke to Linda. It's one of my father's many predictions, but this one hit the mark. Linda had always enjoyed discussing the future with Mr. Anderson. Among their discussions were things like time machines and everyone flying. Flying might actually come true someday. Linda laughed. If that happens, let's fly together with the kids. I smiled too. In every future Linda imagined, I and our children were always there. I should be more grateful for being included in that future as if it were the most natural thing. I love you, Linda, I said, and she blushed. At the same moment, Mr. Anderson made a strange sound from the back seat. I was a bit flustered but looked at Linda with affection. A reunion and a night drive. Today was a day filled with many memories from the past. There were many struggles and setbacks along the way, but all those days are treasures. In my heart, I silently thanked the greatest treasure sitting in the driver's seat and the best mentor lying in the back seat.